Where in the world is Jennifer Kirk?
Vermont. We're in Stowe. Yeah, it is. I know I was in Minneapolis last week. I'm in Stowe. It is pouring outside. Can you hear that? No,
Silence.
that's good. That's good. And I obviously don't have my setup. I mean, I managed to remember to bring the mic, but I don't have my regular light, so I stole Billy's book light and I got it like clipped on here. I actually think it's working decently.
It looks
It's
good.
thanks, I don't know. So I'd like to welcome to BeerNet Radio one of our frequent guests, Shaun Belongie, New Belgium CEO. Of course, New Belgium has had a rocket ship few last years on the back of the Voodoo Ranger franchise, which has helped them, along with the larger platform, become about a top 10 brewer stateside. And I think the last time we checked in with you was fall, and a lot has happened since then. You guys have had some big innovations. Of course, we had Hurricane Helene in Asheville, which was very sad and unfortunate. And you guys have had some leadership changes too at things like Bell's. So welcome, Shaun. We have a lot to talk about.
We sure do. Yeah. Boy, what an eventful 6 or 7 months that was.
Yeah, I know. It's the time warp, right? Like, how long was it? Was it a year? Was it 3 months? But here we are.
Absolutely. Glad to be
So,
here.
yeah, awesome. Well, let's kick it off. This is the first year you guys don't have a big Voodoo Ranger variant, unless I'm mistaken. How has that gone?
Yeah. So correct. We have some new items, but they're kind of not a big new brand in the portfolio as we've had in years past. And that was really intentional on our part, and I think we talked a little bit about that
Hmm.
last year. But what we've seen with Voodoo Ranger is that portfolio has expanded and that brand has grown so fast. What you tend to see, and we saw with Voodoo Ranger as well, is new items in that portfolio tended to be less and less incremental, and so they were kind of pulling volume from the same kind of pool of people, or you just saw less and less incrementality over time. So we really wanted to take a pause in expanding through innovation and really put our focus against the core brands in that portfolio that are really working. And so that being Voodoo Ranger, Imperial, and Juice Force.
Hmm.
And we've really seen that pay off with both those two brands being the only top 10 craft brands growing this year, which again, as I'm sure you're well aware, the craft landscape is pretty challenging. Year to date, it's certainly performed, I think, worse than many of us thought, and we've seen kind of sequentially latest 13 and latest 4 kind of worse than what we had seen in probably latest 52 weeks and even in year to date. So it's a tough time for craft. So to have growth, and again, because you can see that not in the top 10 portfolio, top 10 craft items, to have any growth is actually a really good thing. So we think that actually is going to set us up for healthier long-term growth, to have taken that pause and really focused on the two biggest brands in that portfolio.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And so going from there, you mentioned obviously Imperial's growing and Juice Force growing, some of the smaller variants that are still around seeing slower trends, Fat Tire seeing
Yep.
slower trends. So really, what is, if you could put it in a nutshell, the
Yep.
directive for New Belgium's business this year?
I think there are two things, and having founders of the company who are very wise in how they set up the company. One of Kim Jordan's favorite sayings was "Pros don't panic," and I always like to keep that in mind because she had been through so many ups and downs, and so I think that's one of our mantras is just, hey, act like you've been here before. The category's seen ups and downs, and perhaps this feels worse than others, but we have been here before. And I think the other thing is just focus. And I think what we've talked with our distributors and our retail partners about is just really focus on what's winning, because there's not a lot in the category that is winning. What we hear from retailers and distributors is they really want to focus on those brands that are winning. And so when we look at our portfolio, we kind of know the areas that are really working, which is again kind of the Voodoo Ranger portfolio, and not, as you said, all of it, but kind of the biggest items in there. So we're really putting a lot of emphasis against that and trying to simplify as much as possible in terms of how we're trying to execute against those. And then the Hearted family is the other one we talk a lot about, especially in that kind of Great Lakes region, as one we really want to put focus behind. And again, Depends on how you define winning. But compared to how craft is doing, that brand has also seen some really nice momentum, again, just kind of relative to where the rest of craft is.
Yeah, and so can that brand you think be a mega brand for you guys outside of the Great Lakes region? Is that the charge?
So we've actually pulled the focus back to the Great Lakes region.
Oh, okay.
And when we look at it, we had expanded it nationally, and what we found is that the brand just didn't have enough support in those further flung markets to drive rate of sale. As you know, again, especially if you get further flung and you're in California or Arizona, there's just so many competitors, both local, regional, national, that it's really hard to stand out, especially if you have one or maybe two items on the shelf. And so for that brand, what we looked at is just kind of ran some numbers to go if we're able to grow the Great Lakes region, what does that look like versus what if we can get some growth out of this national push? And in some ways, retailers kind of answered that question for us by just taking items off the shelf where we were kind of further from home. But even the math would suggest that just given the size and scale of that brand portfolio, the Bell's portfolio in the Great Lakes, the growth opportunity is just moving the needle at all in that zone because the brand is so big there.
Going back to directive and innovation, if you know, what are you telling the brand teams like on Voodoo Ranger? If you're not going to do a year-round variant, what are you telling them to work on? Are they still acting like, okay, let's come up with something new? Are you saying maybe think of something smaller like the Malort idea, or what's the communication there?
Yeah, there's kind of two things. I think if you think about 2025, the real fun of Voodoo Ranger, and I think the power of that brand has been that you really are talking about a portfolio. And so, even something like Hard Charge Tea, which is obviously different in the sense that it's not a beer, it's not an IPA. The foundation of what that idea is still the same. It's still this character driven kind of idea of living dangerously through bold flavor and higher ABV. And so the brand team really gets to have fun because it's not like we have to go out and, in more traditional ways, advertise a variant and, go now with more. We get to really just tell stories about this Voodoo Ranger character. And really the way we look at it is just how can we entertain that audience of fans that have grown around that brand. And so when we think about, for the current year, that's really continues to be their effort. And of course, yes, they do the kind of more tactical things of rebates and display programs and all this stuff. But a lot of their work really kind of centers around that idea of just like, what are we going to do to entertain our fans through this character? When we think about 2026, I think that's where now having taken a pause in terms of where we want the portfolio to go, we'll see some new ideas for 2026, having kind of set our feet a little bit more to say, what do we actually need for this brand? And doing that by channel. So thinking the C-store customer is a very different customer than the grocery customer. And that's one of the kind of key things that we learned is something like Fruit Force, for example, did quite poorly in food and grocery. But that flavor profile did very, very well in the convenience store channel. So I think we're just seeing this difference. And part of that, I think, is ABV driven. Part of that is flavor driven. But that is, I think, giving us some push to really think about how we want to continue to build out the portfolio in ways that actually are going to grow the whole pie in as incremental way as possible.
Definitely different consumers, and I would imagine different competitive sets between convenience and grocery too. Do you feel
Yeah,
like you're competing more with F&B and convenience and then craft and grocery?
I think that's a good way to put it. I mean, I do think one of the things that we also I think learned through Fruit Force is just how far can we push an IPA in that portfolio, and I think Fruit Force for the grocery or food customer probably pushed it too far in the sense of it just was like, is this really an IPA? I don't know. This seems pretty far removed. Where in the convenience store, that was like, hey, this I like it. It tastes, it's good. It really tastes good. I'm not as concerned maybe as whether it's a IPA, whether it tastes like a traditional IPA or not.
I wanted to jump back to the Malort because that's
Yeah.
you talk about entertaining your consumers, entertaining everyone with that. You know, what's the response to that, and what's the backstory there? Because I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I mean, the response has been great. I mean, I think the what we look for is just things that are going to again entertain our fans, but also take on a life of their own. They just have talk value, and I think that certainly fits the bill. And especially it would have been one thing to just go, we're doing a collab, and here it is. But the idea that it was a game of roulette, right? Which one, I think just added that extra dimension, and certainly credit, our team kind of thinking about how to make that even more interesting than just a more collab would have been. But that kind of, I would say that there's this genre that we think about in terms of what's going to be a really interesting collab for the brand. And again, so we think about there's kind of social driven ideas. So something like the kind of fake Napa amusement park or beer amusement park that we created, which would be very social driven versus like something we can bring into real life, like a physical beer that's a collaboration with some other partner that's just really interesting. So kind of think about that in a couple different kind of almost genres of ideas. And collaborations are certainly one of them. We did the pepperoni pizza IPA with Tombstone. So we continue to see that really drive traction and just interest. And so that's a continued area of focus for us.
How do you measure the ROI on that, right? Like, have you seen any sort of lift, or is it just enough that you see a certain level of engagement online?
For us, we just look at it as engagement. And I think the other piece of it for us is really just thinking about how people perceive the brand. That's really what we want to drive, because I think I just had written a piece of essay on this in terms of Voodoo Ranger and kind of the backstory of this. And I think that the real key to the kind of growth of that brand has been kind of not taking a traditional approach to how thinking about brand building, in the sense that, will this thing move the needle? Will this drive rate or, return on investment? We kind of don't really think about that. We actually just think about, are we generating a lot of talk? And is that talk kind of driving the perceptions of the brand that we're hoping to drive around this character and the beer or hard tea? And if we do that, we think the metrics will follow. And so we take a bit of a longer, maybe just a counterintuitive approach to how I think brands traditionally think about brand building.
Yeah. And it has worked right up to now. So hopefully it continues to work. And so talking about brand building, that happens obviously in the on-premise. And I think it happens more than ever in C-stores. But what can you share about the health and the dynamics that you're seeing in those channels right now, C-store and on-premise? Because I know we wring our hands about that a lot. I mean, Constellation has talked on recent earnings calls about C-store not being as healthy. So what are you guys seeing?
We are seeing that same dynamic play out. We're just seeing trips to convenience stores, though that's just off. And I think there's probably a couple things going on there. Certainly, we're also just seeing the economic uncertainty, and you can kind of see that in my mind as I've looked at just a lot of different categories, that kind of rippling across a lot of different categories in the grocery store. And then it's I think impacting channel dynamics quite a bit, where convenience store is not necessarily where you're getting the best value. And so we're seeing, again, in a lot of different categories, people trading up or trading down to kind of find value. And that could be value in a lot of different ways. It could be on a price per ounce basis, which you might find more in a grocery or club store, that type of environment, or it could be a price point thing. And we're also seeing that. But generally, I think the convenience store channel is struggling a bit. We actually are continuing to perform really well there. And again, it kind of goes back to my original point on just focus. One of the things we challenge with our distributors with at the beginning of the year, and they've taken up that challenge in a big way, is both our Voodoo Ranger Imperial and Juice Force brands. We're kind of stuck at 40% ACV. So they're in, roughly, somebody will correct me on the actual analytics, but 40% of convenience stores, let's say, kind of had those brands in there. And the thing is that was the highest craft distribution of anything you'd see. But what we challenged our distributors on is just, if you look at the rate of sale for those single serve items, they were up there with any brand from across the beer category.
Mm.
So they were dramatically outperforming craft items. And so we really pushed to say, why are you holding it back from so much more of the convenience store universe? Because we've had a lot of examples where, for example, California, we're at a much higher ACV percentage on those single serves, and the brand continues to perform very, very strongly, even as we expand outlets. So we were at 40%. Our challenge was to get them to 50%, and we're closing in on that. And that's a big driver of kind of why we continue to see growth in that convenience store channel. So we're seeing kind of some of the same softness in just trips into the convenience store, but I think because we are expanding the universe that we're in, plus we continue to see the rate of sale perform very strongly even as we expand it, that's continued to help us be successful. That's probably the standout, and one of the key reasons we've been outperforming craft, even as craft struggles, has been our continued outperformance in the convenience store channel.
Nice. Okay, cool. And then a completely different channel, the
Yeah,
on-premise.
on-premise. Yes, sorry.
I've heard different things, like if you ask Lester Jones, the on-premise is great. If you ask some other people, it's a little slow. So I'm curious what you guys think.
Yeah, I think I would say it's a bit more mixed. I mean, one of the
Mhm.
things that's interesting for us is now adding Kirin Ichiban into the portfolio, and so that's really accelerated the outlets that we're able to go and talk to, because it's just a whole different group of outlets than we would typically be talking to about craft items. And so from our perspective, we see it and we kind of say we've got a lot of opportunity still in the on-premise. And at the same time, a brand like Bell's that's very on-premise driven has seen some struggles in that channel, and I think probably speaks to some of the larger challenges of just, again, foot traffic and kind of economic uncertainty and discretionary income and kind of where people want to spend their money.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It's interesting. Definitely. Well, and let's move on to the Kirin Ichiban side of things for a second. How's that going? Obviously, you guys took it over from AB, the sales and marketing and everything. And what are you doing differently? And how's it going so far?
So coming out of the gates was real rough. I don't think we shipped any beer in January.
Okay.
So fell behind the plan pretty quickly. And that was just related to the distributor transition stuff that was going on. And it was just slower going than we had hoped. We obviously were still dealing with some of the after effects of Hurricane Helene and where we're going to produce the product. So we just had a really kind of slow start to the brand. But I would say we've seen a real acceleration in that brand once we kind of got that all set. We have now 90% of the Ichiban volume flowing through our distributor network that also distributes in Belgium. We've seen a huge increase in retail accounts, something like 5,000 new retail accounts. And month over month, we just continue to see that acceleration. As we talk to distributors, the excitement is also very palpable. As we continue to grow share now of Japanese imports, their excitement around, hey, whereas Anheuser-Busch, this was such a small piece of their overall portfolio, the amount of focus that they would put against it is pretty small. For us, this is potentially a very, very big brand. We have aspirations of making this as big as Two Hearted in the next 5 to 10 years. So for us, because we see there's quite a bit of momentum behind Japanese imports generally, and I think we really can provide a compelling solution for distributors, not just from a brand, but a support perspective, a logistics perspective, that we're really poised, I should say, to grow that brand pretty significantly.
Yeah. And what are the drivers behind the Japanese imports segment?
There's a couple things. I think brand Japan, as we sometimes just say, is really having a moment. I think there's a statistic where the number of Americans who visited Japan last year was at a record number. And so there's just a lot of interest and intrigue behind, I think, Japan as a country, as a culture. And that's translating, I think, into the Japanese import segment. So that's probably the biggest driver I would point to. I think there's also just this, when you think about the imports space generally, there seems to be an ongoing exploratory nature to it, where people are always looking for the next thing and the next story.
Mhm.
And I think Japanese imports has been one of those spaces where I think it has become the next thing of like, ooh, I'd like to learn more about it. And again, I think part of that comes to just this interest and intrigue in Japan as a country. But I think it's just the natural flow of how people who are interested in imports tend to shop around.
Interesting. Yeah, I'd like to visit for what that's worth.
I do too.
Just
Yeah.
was there 2 weeks ago. It's pretty exciting.
Very cool.
Uh, we skipped over some of the innovation, but you launched Light Strike at the beginning of the year, and then Mini Rippers in the spring. What are the early reads there? And especially with the value convenience part we were just talking about, is Mini Rippers kind of playing out the way you had hoped?
Yeah, I'll start with Mini Rippers. So I think Mini Rippers was a bit slower out of the gates just to get to the distribution that we wanted to see. As we've gotten that brand into the market now more fully, we're seeing some really positive signs. So I think to me the most positive sign we're seeing is that where we have both the Mini Ripper cans and which is an 8 pack, and then the 6 pack, traditional cans, we're not seeing any impact from a rate of sale perspective on the 6 pack cans. And in fact, those stores that are carrying both are seeing better results on their 6 pack. So it's actually lifting the kind of it's growing the pie essentially for the Juice Force brand. So that to me is a really good sign. We just now are starting to work with our distributors to build out kind of all of the things we need to do to really bring this to life. And when I think about that, it's thinking about single serve offerings and in kind of countertop racks at checkout. It's in dump bins and looking for kind of lower price point single serve offerings in convenience stores. And so that stuff is really just starting now that we've kind of gotten the distribution of the actual 8 pack in market. So I would say we've got work to do, but there's some early signs of positivity. With Light Strike, we're in some ways a bit of a victim of our own expectations. And so that brand, that product, when we were really figuring out how to make it, it is so new to the world. Like no one that we knew, we couldn't find anybody who actually had the capability to put alcohol in a PET bottle. So when we found a manufacturer who thought they could do that with some changes, the capacity that we thought we were going to have was pretty limited. So we had a lot of excitement early on from the grocery channel for that brand. And so we had to make a choice essentially of, do you want to do grocery or do you want to do convenience store independent type markets? And so the 4 pack, we ended up choosing 4 pack and putting that in grocery. The performance of that brand is, if you look at it versus other new innovations in the kind of F&B RTD space, it's actually doing pretty well. It's not, lighting the world on fire, but it's doing pretty well. But I think what we've learned is that it's actually performing a lot better as a single serve in convenience stores and independent markets. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. Again, because it's such a different product, trial is so huge. And so when you come to this grocery store and you look at it, it's like, it's $10 for a 4 pack, and you're like, what is this thing? I don't know. That's a lot of money especially in an environment where people are being very cautious about their spending. It's a lot of money to spend on a very unproven thing. So in a convenience store world where we're not having the 4 pack and we're not having that cost, where we can have it at a lower price, but obviously it's a single serve, so it's a lower price point anyways. I think that's really driving a lot better trial, and then we're seeing the repeat as well. So our efforts there, I would say it's kind of too early to tell. We've got a lot of distributors who have said, stick with it. We've seen this play out before. It may go nowhere, but also when something is so different like this, it does take a bit of time. So one of the things that we've done to respond is knowing again that the single serve in convenience store has performed really well, is that we're launching a third flavor, Light Strike Blue. If you are a blue
Gatorade,
sport drink fan, I think the official name is Blue Rush. It's a great flavor. People love it. People always ask me like, when are you coming out with blue? So
yeah.
Blue is coming out, but it's going to be a single serve offering in a kind of loose tray pack. So it's not going to have the shrink wrap kind of 4 pack thing. It's just going to be loose pack. So it's meant for convenience store and on-premise opportunities. And so we're hopeful that that can really start generating, again, just more opportunities, because right now we only have 4 packs. So to the extent that a retailer is doing a single serve offering, they're essentially having to tear those 4 packs apart, which is obviously not ideal. And there's plenty of retailers and distributors who just don't want to do that. So this gives them an opportunity to kind of have the product in a format that actually can work for that channel.
Yeah. I I love the innovative packaging, and I think it's an area that beer could and should explore more. But like you were kind of discussing, I get the impression that a lot of people are fearful of a wrench it might throw into sourcing, packing. Um, do you
Absolutely.
do you still want to explore these new packaging innovations, or has it been a headache where you're like, well, maybe maybe we hold off on going down that road any further?
It's definitely been a headache, but I think part of what we just need to think through is just what role does that play in the concept? I think as an idea, when we've talked to consumers, we kind of said, let's break out what is Light Strike and let's talk through that idea. There's a liquid part of that idea, which is no carbonation, but this kind of high flavor expectation of kind of what sports drinks taste like, with kind of lower alcohol. And that whole package is like, that's really attractive. Now, could that be attractive in a can? Perhaps. But what we also hear is the resealability is actually really, really important. So I think as long as there's a functional reason, or there's a value to that package, and certainly we've seen that play out in a number of other brands where resealability or just the uniqueness of the package does add a lot. Then it's going to make a lot of sense. If the only idea you have is the package, then
Right.
I'm not sure it's probably worth all that effort.
Vortex bottle. Yeah.
Right.
Oh my God.
The Vortex, yes. I believe we have someone here who worked on the Vortex bottle, and it comes up from time to time.
Bring him in. Bring him in. What did you say? I'm curious, like the SRP for the singles at C stores are for Light Strike?
It's going to be somewhere around 2 to 250 a
Oh,
bottle.
okay. Okay.
So it ends, and it probably closer to 2 depending on the
Yeah.
market. So
Yeah.
it obviously a much lower price point, but it also just gets you it just on an individual basis, but also just on a kind of per ounce basis gets you probably closer to where you need to be.
Yeah. I'm just curious because I know, and I don't think it was necessarily in the C store channel because of, being spirit space, but I know Monaco kind of built on like the 2 for $5 proposition,
Yep.
right? And so I'm
Yep.
curious if you guys are looking at anything like that.
Yeah, and we'll end up in one of those buckets. From a C store perspective, you need to be in one of those, especially those markets that have the kind of 2 for whatever. You have to find a lane, and so depending
Yeah.
on kind of where we end up falling, it will probably be somewhere in that ballpark.
Yeah. Just curious. I mean, it encourages trial. So,
Yes,
you
absolutely. I
know,
mean, that's the key for us,
oh, I
because
think so.
when people have the product, it's a great experience. It's just getting them over the hump of what is this thing now? Why is it in that bottle?
Right.
It's just not as
Yeah.
intuitive as maybe we had hoped it would be, where you just see it like, oh, I get it.
Right. No, that makes sense. I mean, like we've been talking about, just a heavy lift of new brands, but somebody's got to do it at some point. So I'm sure you guys will figure it out. Yeah. Well, let's talk about your Asheville brewery because, you've mentioned it a couple times. Obviously, it had, was shut down for a while last year because of the hurricane. Hopefully, everything's been rebuilt and it's all up and running. Is everything at 100%? And did you guys leave as much as you or as little as you thought you would on the table there?
Yeah, I mean, and first I should start by just saying, hopefully everyone in Central
Mhm.
Texas is
Mhm.
is doing okay. It was just horrible over the weekend, and obviously, what we experienced in Asheville was bad, and so we have some sense of what has happened, but in other ways we have no idea. And so sometimes when I'm talking about this, it's like, well, getting the beer back flowing is
It's
important, but
nice.
maybe
Yeah. Right. True.
not as important as some of what you're dealing with. So, anyways, certainly thoughts go out to anyone who's affected by that. But yeah, we have been able to get the brewery back up and running. Just some Herculean efforts by people inside the company and outside the company. So we ended up being out of production for 3 months. We started brewing 3 months after the entire brewery was shut down and covered in 18 inches of mud. So you just kind of think about that, and we've had Kieran visitors and folks from Lion come in, and they're just kind of amazed when they see kind of the before and after and how quickly that all came together. So yeah, it's I couldn't be prouder of the team for kind of everything that they were able to accomplish there. And in that as well, as you kind of alluded to, we obviously had to scramble to figure out where to make all of the volume that could not be made in Asheville. Our team here in Fort Collins put in a huge effort. The folks in Asheville, Daleville, everyone has just kind of been running full bore to actually keep things going. And so yeah, we have lost less, basically less than we had expected. It's still there. It's still a drag because once distribution is kind of the gift that gives and takes, in sense of when you get it, it's really sticky, and when you lose it, it's also really sticky. So we had to make some tough decisions in our portfolio just of where we were going to, focus our efforts on things that we wanted to continue to make. And so some of those longer tail items that didn't make the cut have just been really slow to get back into kind of full distribution. But the other thing I should say is that we got the Tamron survey. I don't know if you're familiar with that. That's the kind of supply chain distributor survey about supply chain. And we were actually the number one supplier as a supply chain organization as rated by distributors after Helene.
Oh, wow.
Which is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
But I also, it speaks certainly to our team and just kind of the communication and our order and management team and all that. But it also just speaks to our distributors. Our distributors, knew we were dealing with and were willing to be really flexible and work with us to kind of manage through that in a way that protected kind of our business, their business, but just, they didn't put us in the penalty box. They really tried to work with us to make everything go as well as it could. So certainly a lot of kudos goes out to them as well.
Yeah, it's good to hear that, all things considered, everybody banded together and you guys are trucking along, and that's great. I know that you had some co-packing and you did some at Comstock and at Daleville, and I'm curious. I mean, what's the role of Daleville these days? Is it still sort of your innovation R&D center? You doing a little bit of, you do some super secret stuff there too. What can you say about what's going on there?
It's our Skunk Works facility. It's our Swiss Army knife. It's kind of we can do anything there. Yeah, so they can make beer, and they can make kind of any RTD you can imagine, from wine to malt based to spirit based, all that stuff. And so they've been doing a lot of has been beer related, because they can make really good IPAs. And so they've been really focused on making particularly all the Force line of brands, given their East Coast location and their kind of closeness to Asheville. That's been a really important part of that recovery effort. But at the same time, we've been bringing in a lot of our products that would kind of fit in that beyond beer category that we had been producing outside of our own four walls into Daleville. So things like hard charge tea, we still make fruit smash, hard seltzer, that we brought that all back in to that facility. And we're looking for more opportunities like that. That's where the Skunk Works part comes in. So, yet to be named, very super secret projects in looking in kind of that beyond beer space. We obviously continue to look for opportunities there to incubate things. And they're the facility that can really do that. In the meantime, we also entertain co-packing, meaning external co-packing opportunities. We have done that before. We'll continue to look to do that to kind of fill in the gaps as necessary as we continue to try to build out our own portfolio. But next year, we'll make somewhere in the neighborhood of $5 to $10 million of investment into that facility to just upgrade some things that needed to be upgraded from a kind of infrastructure standpoint, but also just to expand the capacity such that it's ready to go if we are able to kind of get to something that we can scale in a bigger way.
Yeah. Yeah, and then just one more from me, even though it is kind of a big one.
Okay, I'm ready.
Yeah, so get ready.
Stretch.
All right, yeah, stretch. Um, Speaking of new brands, what does Kieran Line feel like right now in terms of their appetite so far as they influence your company, right? As part of that. Do they want you bringing on more brands, more partners, this sort of thing? I mean, I know you've said before that you would look internally first, like for other Kieran partners, but what are they and what are you thinking about for that right now?
Yeah, I think we're in a bit of a time when we're kind of just working to kind of better understand how do they want to think about the global landscape. And they've been very clear that the US, from an alcoholic beverage perspective, is really important. And the idea that we need to expand outside of traditional craft is also something that they very much believe in. But I think then the question becomes, as you said, the first place we will be looking is internally and organically in terms of, can we create something ourselves? Can we draw from something in the Kira network that's around the world, from Japan to Australia? Is there something there that's going to make sense? And then then I think that the next step is to go, is there something that we need to go find that we don't have in another capacity? And that's where I think there's kind of more of a holding pattern of just like, how do they want to think about that, and what kind of ambition and time frame do they want to consider as they think about how to grow their presence in the US? Clearly, again, it is a growth opportunity for them. They see that, they want to invest in it. And I think the question is just, in some ways, a portfolio question for them of just how much they want to invest and how quickly they want to get there.
I think we covered all the hard hitting questions.
Okay.
So I want to do a fun one and then I guess a more serious one. But
Okay.
we were talking about some of the Voodoo Ranger campaigns earlier. Do you have a favorite? And has there ever been one that's been like, whoa, this might be a little too much. Let's tone this down a little.
um, so I will say my favorite is by far the beer amusement park idea, where we had convinced residents of Napa that we were going to try to open a beer park inside of Napa Valley. Mainly because the artist who does renderings for Six Flags and Universal and right kind of it imagines rides and explains them. We had hired that person, kind of absurdly to think about what beer amusement rides would be, and it really put a lot of thought into drawings and renderings. And so every time I read that, the details were just absolutely amazing. Um, the one that probably was very funny, but also I said, "Ooh, that probably went a little far." Was I'm not sure if you see these in Texas. I don't know how else to say this other than truck nuts that kind of hang off.
Yeah.
So we created a pair of Voodoo Ranger. They were hops, truck nuts,
That's
which was
amazing.
very funny. And I also had some nightmares about that. And fortunately, I think there was only one that was created. So it was a limited edition, but nevertheless, but sometimes you need to kind of push the boundaries a little bit to kind of see where they are and then nudge your way back from them.
Or
Nudge.
not your way back from them.
Yes,
Yeah.
or yeah.
Do they still have the prototype? Y'all can send us some, right? Because I
Oh man,
definitely.
I wish. I don't think they do, because I've asked that and I was told no.
Yeah, when we come to Fort Collins, I'm gonna
Yeah.
hit the gift
Okay.
shop
Yeah.
asking
Okay. Yep. Yep.
where the truck nuts.
Gonna-
Uh,
yeah.
and
We did
then
call them hop nuts. Okay, just to be clear.
and then for the more serious one and kind of building from there, I'm sure you are aware of the think tank NBWA is organizing later this year, and I'm sure you read the Ad Age article on a
Yep.
month or so ago. Um, as an experienced marketer in various CPG, what is your thoughts on beers marketing? Does it have a problem, or do you see anywhere where we can build or fix or correct?
I mean, yeah, boy, that's a serious question. I got to stretch
Okay.
out for that one. Um, I guess I'll say I'm less of a believer of the kind of category advertising in the sense of the got milk style of category building. But I do think there is absolutely an opportunity for beer to, and I'll put beer in quotes because I think we
Hmm.
should think about it broadly in terms of not just traditional beer, but kind of everything we're talking about in terms of RTD kind of stuff in a can. There is an opportunity to think about the way that brand advertising is coming to life, almost more individually, to say, how do we really think about attracting a younger audience, obviously legal drinking age, but there's been so much shifts from just a media perspective and just kind of the way people consume media that and I'd be the first to acknowledge we don't have this solved either. I think Voodoo Ranger is probably a good case study where we've done some good work there. And you can certainly see it in other, if you look across the category, you can see brands that have been successful doing it. So it's out there. But I think the big opportunity is, can we get some of the bigger brands to also get to that place where they're really starting to draw big numbers, because that the scale of the category is such that most of the volume is in the biggest players. So I do think there is opportunity to really think about how you are going to bring in the next generation, and thinking about how marketing can play a role in doing that in a way that maybe it's not doing as effective as a job as it is today. But how that's going to happen, boy, that's going to be a challenging one. It's really getting all the best minds together.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I know. I do. That could be an SNL skit, right? All the Bevalk CMOs together, and oh, they're only, they've all worked together somewhere else at some point, and but they're, yeah,
Yeah.
that'll be fun.
Yes.
So, just for what it's worth, I mean, I'm not a beer marketer, but from what I'm seeing, what works, including you guys and the way you've marketed, I feel like it almost has to be exclusively not about the beer itself. It almost has to
Right.
be something about something else entirely. Like you guys have made it about this character, and cigarettes are kind of having a revival in some circles too, but it's not about the cigarette at all. They're calling it like something. I forget. No, no, no. I reversed it. I'm sorry. I'm having a hairy moment. It's Diet Coke, and they're calling it fridge ciggies. That's what it is. It's Diet Coke, and they're calling it
Uh,
fridge ciggies. So it's not about the soda at all. It's about something actually worse for you. And yet Gen Z is eating it up because it's about escapism, right? It's not about soda and it's not about smoking. It's about, you know, just relaxation, right? And you would think
yeah.
that that would work for beer, but I think we're still so self-referential and tied up in our own, looking at what we've done before and just can't think outside of the four walls, that it's just really hard. And nobody wants to be marketed to anymore either,
Right.
right? So
Right.
good
Right.
luck.
Right. Right.
It's
And that's where I think
impossible.
you can see those pockets across the category. And it's just, how do we do more of that, really?
Yeah. 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 So it'll be interesting. I guess my last question is, we mentioned some of the leadership changes. Carrie Juncker is
Yep.
left Bell's after a very long time. She was a great leader. How has that changed Bell's? And then also Sam Fisher, right, left as Lion, or is leaving as Lion's
Yep.
CEO.
Yep.
So do you think these things are going to fundamentally change the company? What do you see after that?
So, I'll just start with Carrie. I think anytime you lose somebody, as you said, who's been such a long tenured person and at a company and is just a great person generally, yeah, there's a cultural loss to that for sure, and we feel that. At the same time, when the two companies got integrated, we knew that Carrie's role would eventually go away because we integrated in such a way that we didn't want to have two separate teams. We have kind of collective teams. So the marketing team's the marketing team, the sales team's the sales team, finance team, right? So all those teams are kind of collectively working together, and it's not what you sometimes see, which is like, hey, there's one company A and there's company B. And so we knew that going into that. And so Carrie had spent a lot of time preparing the next set of leaders who are going to be physically in Kalamazoo to be ready for that. And so I think there was time and that preparation has happened. And so I think she left it in a great place for those leaders to now step in and take more of that mantle. But there's always a loss to that. I would say that the other thing we have is we have these kind of foundational principles as a company that were laid down by our founders at the Belgium. And I think that's the thing that creates the consistency that whether I'm here, whether Carrie's here, whether Kim Jordan is here, that's the thing that carries through. And so it's not about an individual. Certainly we feel losses of individuals because they're great people and they do some great work, but it's those foundational principles that carry through, and everyone can kind of own a piece of that and carry that forward together. So I think we're in a little different place than a lot of companies where when they lose a leader, it's like, well, the whole point was that leader. And for us, it's like, well, it's not about just that one person. It's the principles that we have as a company and how we operate as a company. That's what it's about. And we all collectively have ownership of that, not just one person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
And Sam, he's still around. Yeah, he's my boss, and he will be here till October. He's very much engaged, I can tell you, having sat through some business review meetings with him recently. But I think that will be, again, I just go back to kind of the way the company runs. That's what was attractive to Lion and Kieran in the first place. That's not going to change. So how that ends up playing out in terms of who replaces him or what the reporting structure, like we'll figure that out, but I don't anticipate that's going to have a major impact on how we work.
Well, an eventful year for you guys
Yes.
yet again, right? But a lot of good things too. I mean, it sounds like you more and more you have a portfolio approach. Like Kieran Ichiban is another leg of the stool that you didn't have before,
absolutely.
right?
Yep.
And I think that makes you a lot stronger. So,
yeah, when I look at our portfolio, despite the category challenges, you kind of look around the supplier universe and go, I'm not sure a lot of suppliers would like to trade for our portfolio. So while we're certainly feeling the effects that everyone else is feeling, we feel really good about the portfolio that we have, the brands that we have, and our ability to kind of continue to find more legs to that stool, essentially, and just that kind of permission to innovate and explore to figure out what those might be.
Well, cool. Well, that's all I had. Jay, you have any more?
No. I'm done too.
Yeah.
I wore you out.
No, I felt bad about springing that serious one on you, so I'll leave it there.
It's great to talk with you.
Yeah, great
Always
talking
fun.
to you as always. Absolutely. And we're looking forward to come visiting in September. Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay, more to be revealed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. Is there anything in particular we should bring or wear or pack, like
Yeah, just one of those helmets with the things for the beers.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Need the larger size for the 19.2 ounce cans.
Or the Gatorade, Light Strike bottles.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes,
Exactly.
yes.
Okay.
Koozies for those. Yep.
Cool. Awesome. All right. Well, we'll see you then, Shaun. Looking
right.
forward to it.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Cheers.
All right. See you.